Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in Amateur Radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition, number 1326 with a release and air date of Saturday, July 27, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
Serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable, amateur radio news and special features, we are, this week in Amateur Radio. Celebrating our 25th year on the air, and streaming on the internet, we are the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1326 of, This Week in Amateur Radio. The ARRL Board of Directors completes its second meeting for 2024 and approves a report to advance a 3-year strategy. We will have all the details. We will have a special in-depth look at amateur radio during hurricane season in a special story authored by Sierra Harrop, W5DX. The Massachusetts Maritime Academy's Advanced Studies and Leadership Program gets training in amateur radio. Ted Rappaport, N9NB, is elected to the IEEE Vehicular Technical Society's Hall of Fame. The first N-Class license is issued in Germany. The Radio Amateurs of Canada is calling for nominations for its board of directors. There are changes in the ARRL Hudson division. We will have them for you. Amateurs provide communications during an airlift operation in Oregon. Hams participate in one of the largest naval exercises to take place. Over 20 SpaceX satellites have rained down on Earth recently. The AMSAT mail Alias service will be coming to an end next month. Both US and European broadcasters are meeting with car manufacturers in an effort to keep AM radio in cars. And, what is it like to find yourself stranded on the International Space Station? 2 astronauts have been stuck there since June 5th. We will have the story, coming up, in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio, will talk about how being a maverick is part of the deal. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with a brand new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to visit 1915 and the establishment of amateur radio trunk lines. This period was when the newly established league set its main goal at establishing reliable message relaying across the entire country. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Salyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DX expeditions, DX in general, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air, right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside Albany, New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting this week from my ham shack, where every time I fire up the 80-meter transmitter, my wife's book light blinks on and off. She finds it very annoying. Oh well, carry on. I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where the lawns are all drying out, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our news bureau in Western Massachusetts, where everyone collectively begins to remember that summer is closing in fast, trying to get in those last-minute activities, I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where we're enjoying some roasted corn on the cob, direct from the Hardwood Grill this evening, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the mercury is back to tickling the top of the thermometer bulb this week, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our news this week, ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, gabbled in the 2024 second meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors on Friday, July 19th, in Windsor, Connecticut. With more on the meeting, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report from League headquarters.
The board meeting was preceded by standing committee meetings held on Thursday, including Administration and Finance, chaired by Rocky Mountain Division Director Jeff Ryan, K0RM, Emergency Communications and Field Services, chaired by Great Lakes Division Director Scott Yonley, N8SY, and Programs and Services, chaired by Dakota Division Director Bill Lippert, AC0W. President Roderick recognized new officers and board members, including First Vice President Christian McIntyre, K6WX, Second Vice President Mike Ritz, W7VO, Hudson Division Director Ed Wilson, N2XDD, Northwestern Division Director Mark Tharp, KB7HDX, Northwestern Division Vice Director Michael Sturbeck, KG7HQ, Pacific Division Director Tony Marson, W7XM, and Pacific Division Vice Director John Litz, NZ6Q. Highlights of the meeting, including the board unanimously accepting a report establishing a 3-year strategy for ARRL and recognized the efforts of the strategy working group. They authorized CEO Dave Minster, NA2AA, to proceed with further planning. The report included a revised mission statement. ARRL's mission is to promote and protect the art, science, and enjoyment of amateur radio and to develop the next generation of radio amateurs. The strategy articulates continued commitment and enhancements to our existing advocacies. Promoting amateur radio and protecting amateur radio, a new advocacy is being created, committing ARRL to develop the next generation of radio amateurs through the expansion of existing programs and the creation of curriculum-based initiatives targeted at middle and high school STEM education programs. You can read more about the ARRL board meeting at arrl.org. The complete minutes of the 2024 second meeting will be available soon on the ARRL website. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The strategy calls for investments in information technology to continue along the path of the League's digital transformation. This will include evaluating membership models, content delivery methods, and next-generation software products along with the infrastructure improvements required to support them. With more coverage of the ARRL Board of Directors meeting, we go to our own Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
The ARRL Board is looking to serve members in driving growth through technology. In committing to dramatically expanding our capabilities and activities in the STEM education space and investing in upgrades and additions to our information technology platform, we recognize that revenue from membership dues is insufficient to fund these initiatives. In fact, dues contribute less than half the revenue required to operate ARRL. Efforts are required to develop new sources of revenue and seek support from donors and grants from both public and private organizations. The board requested the President establish the ARRL Information Technology Advisory Committee, or ITAC, acknowledging the importance of providing information technology-based service to ARRL members and to improve and protect ARRL systems. The ITAC will engage experts in the field of IT to help oversee the development, operations, and evolution of the ARRL IT system infrastructure and applications. The board reassigned the Logbook of the World Maintenance Committee to the newly established Information Technology Advisory Committee. ITAC will support the Maintenance Committee's responsibilities with the Logbook of the World development, including technical changes and future upgrades to the system. Further, the board recommended and authorized the creation of additional publications, including books and online resources and products such as antenna kits, to help expand ARRL's commitment to help hams who are faced with limits on station building capabilities due to space limitations and/or limited resources. The board requested that the President appoint a study group to review the current structure of ARRL governance and the field organization and suggest changes that would improve the organization and better support the membership. The board also requested that the President establish an ad hoc committee to review the ARRL Director's Workbook and establish an annual review process to keep the document up to date with board practices and procedures. The board approved expanding the policy for recording roll call votes to being required for any pending motions pertaining to ARRL governance documents. Following recent review of ARRL's trademarks and the completion of related registrations and trademark renewals, the board requested the CEO to provide a report at its next meeting consisting of efforts and actions taken during 2024 to identify, remedy, and protect the use of its trademarks by other parties. The complete minutes of the 2024 second meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors will be available soon on the ARRL website. The next meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors will be January 17th and 18th, 2025.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
ARRL encourages amateur radio stations to prepare for what the National Hurricane Center has predicted will be a busy hurricane season. With more on this special story, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ at League Headquarters.
In addition to preparing equipment to function during and after a storm's impact, local amateur radio emergency service ARES nets are encouraged to participate in hurricane reporting and relief nets. Stations do not need to be in a coastal zone to participate. Propagation often shifts well inland, meaning ham radio operators throughout the continent can serve in times of need. Monitoring and relaying traffic is a way to help with the nets and get real-time information to the NHC, where it can be shared with the National Weather Service, FEMA, and other emergency response organizations to aid in a more rapid response and recovery, said ARRL Director Emergency Management Josh Johnson, KE5MHV. Amateur radio plays a crucial role in the warning and recovery process of hurricanes, from providing surface observations, which gives forecasters at the National Hurricane Center ground truth, to providing communications when infrastructure is damaged, and ham radio is as vital as ever. Much of the focus to get the information to and from the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. Hurricane specialists rely on having an amateur radio station at the center, WX4NHC. Julio Rapol, WD4R, is the amateur radio assistant coordinator for the station, and he pointed out these service reports can be weather data or eyewitness reports, or heard on local VHF and UHF, and they are very valuable to the hurricane specialist at NHC, as they fill gaps of data where they may not have from other means, such as government, weather stations, satellites, and hurricane hunter aircraft. The NHC would like more hams to provide information if they are in the affected area. There are many ways to do that. The simplest is over high-frequency HF amateur radio bands. There you'll find a dedicated team running the Hurricane Weather Watch Net. The net uses 14.325 megahertz and 7.268 megahertz, depending on propagation, and is usually active any time a hurricane is within 300 statute miles of a populated landmass or at the request of NHC. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
There's a robust ecosystem of communication networks that all work in tandem to provide coverage anytime a named storm is within a few hundred miles of land. These separate but partner volunteer organizations serve much of the Western Hemisphere on many different bands and modes. We are strategically dispersed across North America, throughout the Caribbean islands, Central America, and the northern coast of South America so that we can provide a continuous path of communications from storm-affected areas, said Bobby Graves, KB5HAV, Hurricane Watch Net Manager. The net has members who speak many of the languages in the hurricane zones, including English and Spanish. Now, with more on the Hurricane Watch and other nets, we go to our own Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
The Hurricane Watch Net is a two-way street of information. While the reports coming in are critical to forecasters, information from the NHC is even more important to people in the path of the storm. Weather information is relayed in real time from the National Hurricane Center throughout the network as well. In addition to the weather information and reporting, the HWN assists the Salvation Army's Saturn net with outgoing health and welfare traffic from the affected area, messages sent via ham radio from those being impacted by the storm. WX4NHC also receives reports via WinLink email over amateur radio via the address WX4NHC@winlink.org. The email subject line must start with //WL2K. There is a web form on the WX4NHC website to provide information as well. For those without HF capabilities or who may have their antennas unavailable during the storm, the VoIP Hurricane Net provides a parallel capability using modern digital technologies. VoIP Hurricane Net Manager Rob Macedo, KD1CY, says the scope of this net gives a big picture look at what's happening. Our net gathers reports from amateur radio nets and amateur radio operators at the local, state, and regional level that connect directly or liaison to our net on WX Talk Echo Link conference node number 7203/IRLP 9219 reflector. The connections to our net can include other VoIP modes such as Fusion, All-Star, AMSAT Hotline, and certain types of DMR, among other VoIP modes via the KC5FM, Auxcom, and Sunflower systems, he said. VoIP Hurricane Net also provides observations from social media monitoring. With the robust systems in place to handle traffic, organizers encourage radio amateurs in the path of the storms to participate in the nets. We encourage all who are in the path of a landfall hurricane to join us and share their local observed weather information. No matter how insignificant you may feel of your data may be, it's very important to the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center, said Graves. Sometimes radio ham reports are the only reports received from the islands or sparsely populated areas, said Rapoli. Michael Brennan, the director of the National Hurricane Center, added, the NHC Ham Shack Network has played a crucial role for more than 40 years in providing real-time information during tropical storms and hurricane. The information provided by ham radio is incredibly helpful to NHC's hurricane specialists as it provides on-the-ground data during an event and offers a valuable option to maintain communications in situations where traditional communications methods can fail or become unavailable. We thank Sierra Harrop, W5DX, for the use of her story.
ARRL Director Nomar Vizcarando, NP4H, who has represented the Hudson Division since March of 2023, has stepped down, effectively July 12, 2024, at 5 p.m. Eastern. Vice Director Ed Wilson, N2XDD, accedes to the director's chair to complete the remainder of a 3-year term ending December 31st, 2024. Wilson has served as vice director since June 2023. He has held ARRL field organization appointments as an emergency coordinator and public information officer. Wilson is also an accredited volunteer examiner. Vizcarando says he still plans to be active in the ham radio community. I have a great deal of respect for ARRL, and anything I can do to keep amateur radio thriving, I'll keep doing it. It's not goodbye, it's see you later, he said. ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, will announce a successor to Wilson to fill the vacant vice director's seat. The ARRL Hudson Division is comprised of the ARRL sections of Eastern New York City, Long Island, and Northern New Jersey. Meanwhile, Randall Carlson, WB0JJX, has become a silent key. He passed away June 7th of 2024. Carlson was the section manager for the ARRL Delaware section from December 1992 until 2005. He was originally licensed in the 1970s, according to his obituary. Carlson was 66 years old.
Members of the combined Falmouth Amateur Radio Association and Barnstable Amateur Radio Club gave an introduction to amateur radio presentation as part of the Massachusetts Maritime Academy's Advanced Studies and Leadership Program Camp. Here with more details is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The presentation was held in mid-July at the Academy's new conference center with approximately 180 students in attendance. ASLP is a 2-week summer college-like residential experience developed by the Cape Cod Collaborative with the Massachusetts Maritime Academy. Emphasis is placed on leadership and development, project-oriented instruction in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM areas, as well as humanities for high-achieving students from the 19 Cape Cod Collaborative member school districts. Students attended presentations including an overview of the many facets of amateur radio, its role in emergency communication and events such as hurricanes, and an overview of amateur radio satellite communication, focusing on CubeSats, several of which had been built by students. In addition to get-on-the-air GOTA stations were set up. Students were allowed to make radio contact with licensed amateurs watching and listening. The VHF GOTA station contacted several FARA members on the local N1YHS repeater. The HF GOTA station made several contacts, including amateur radio stations in Bulgaria, Italy, and Nova Scotia. Organizers reported students in the ASLP camp were attentive and asked good questions. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Barnstable Amateur Radio Club members included Bruce Semple, WA3SWJ, Norm Canton, WA1NLG, Rob Lydon, K1UI, and Lem Skidmore, W1LEM. Falmouth Amateur Radio Association members participating were Chris Rainey, WA1CMR, and Ralph Swenson, N1YHS.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Partners integrated and prepared is the theme of Rim of the Pacific 2024, the world's largest international military maritime exercise, which began June 27th and will come to a close on August 1st. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with all the details.
Conducted from Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, Oahu, Hawaii, the exercise encompasses many islands in the Hawaiian chain. The event included 29 nations, 40 surface ships, 3 submarines, 14 national land forces, and over 150 aircraft and more than 25,000 personnel, including amateur radio operators working with healthcare facilities. The amateur radio portion of the exercise has been completed. ARRL Assistant Section Manager and State Government Liaison Michael Miller, KH6ML, said 36 amateur radio operators from Hawaii volunteered to demonstrate the value of amateur radio in emergency preparedness and response. It turned out very good, said Miller. Some of the hospitals, staff, and administrators involved had their first experience with amateur radio. The operators were able to blend their skills using public service radios, satellite phones, as well as amateur radio. Miller pointed out that hospitals on the smaller islands don't usually have a full-time communications officer, so working with amateur radio gives them experience for future emergencies. The amateurs worked with HealthCom Hawaii, which provides amateur radio communications to healthcare associations in Hawaii during emergencies and disasters. HealthCom Hawaii really needs 100 more operators for backup and to build skill sets through monthly exercises, Miller added. Vice Admiral John Wade, Commander U.S. 3rd Fleet and RIMPAC 2024 Combined Task Force Commander, said the Rim of the Pacific exercise has grown over the years to be the world's largest and premier combined maritime training opportunity. The exercise purpose is to build relationships, to enhance interoperability and proficiency, and ultimately contribute to the peace and stability in the vitally important Indo-Pacific region. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Many of the volunteers participating in RIMPAC 2024 are also members of other vital emergency communication groups such as Amateur Radio Emergency Service, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, and Community Emergency Response Teams.
Professor Theodore Ted S. Rappaport, Ph.D., N9NB, has been elected to the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE Vehicular Technology Society's, or VTS, Hall of Fame.
The IEEE VTS Hall of Fame recognizes individuals whose truly outstanding leadership and contributions have had a significant impact on the technologies represented by the fields of interest of the IEEE VTS. The VTS is one of the oldest societies in IEEE. Dr. Rappaport is a tenured professor in the New York University NYU Electrical Engineering Department in the Tandem School of Engineering and the Kennard School of Mathematics and the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. He has co-authored over 300 papers and 20 books, including the most cited books on wireless communications, adaptive antennas, wireless simulation, and millimeter wave communication, which have been translated into 8 languages. Dr. Rappaport was first licensed in 1975 and joined ARRL that same year. He now holds an amateur extra class license. He's been an ARRL life member since 1983 and received an ARRL scholarship to help him complete his doctorate at Purdue University. Amateur radio has been more influential in my life than I could have imagined, said Rappaport. At age 14, I was able to teach adults about amateur radio and electronic principles to help them become licensed operators. I believe that led to my career in academia and teaching. Dr. Rappaport said that the amateur radio literally saved his life when he was younger. While in the hospital with acute myeloid leukemia, AML, a form of blood cancer, I asked for more time. I still am on the air today and a blessed individual, added Rappaport. The IEEE asked Dr. Rappaport to write the history of amateur radio, and he agreed on the condition that it would be available to amateur radio operators and the public at no charge. The Crucible of Communications, Part 1 and 2, are complete and can be read online. He's currently working on Part 3 and hopes to have it completed in the near future. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Induction ceremonies to the VTS Hall of Fame for Dr. Rappaport will be in Washington, D.C. on October 9th, 2024.
The deadline to submit entries for 2024 ARRL Field Day was July 23rd. Over 4,000 entries have been received. There is still time to check and correct entries by visiting ARRL Field Day portal. Entries shown as complete in the status column have all the necessary documentation required. However, entries with the status of pending documents need to be reviewed, and any missing or incomplete information should be added. Corrections may be made until August 23rd. For more Field Day information or questions, contact fdinfo@arrl.org via email or phone 860-594-0232.
A long-standing member service, the AMSAT mail alias service is scheduled to end on August 31, 2024. A mail alias on AMSAT.org permitted people to send an email to members without knowing their actual internet email address. They just needed to know their amateur radio call sign. Unfortunately, the unchecked rise in domain name hacking and email account hijacking has made it impossible to sustain this service at a cost-effective level. The number of callsign@amsat.org email accounts that had been hijacked and converted to zombie spam accounts over the years had led many internet service providers and gateway centers to ban all @amsat.org email addresses, including those business accounts of AMSAT officers and officials. The tireless efforts of AMSAT's all-volunteer IT staff has worked for years to repair much of the damage, but AMSAT still gets complaints from members who are not getting their personal emails, ANS bulletins or AMSAT BB posts because of persistent delivery problems. It has come to the point where the AMSAT volunteer IT staff can no longer keep up with the maintenance requirements to keep the alias mail list clean and to work with email gateways to remove blocks. And, after considerable investigation into alternative paid email services, AMSAT leadership decided that the money required to keep an email alias system alive would be better spent on building and flying satellites for its members. Persons using the mail alias service should begin to migrate to different email accounts so they do not lose receipt of personal emails, AMSAT News Service weekly bulletins, AMSAT BB posts, or official messages from AMSAT itself. Members are especially asked to make sure they are not using a call sign at amsat.org as their registered email address in the AMSAT membership portal. Members can easily change their registered member email address by logging into the portal and updating their profile.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from all over. First up is the Tevel series of satellites is approaching re-entry, with Tevel 5 already re-entered on July 18th. The Tevel mission consists of 8 satellites developed by the Herzliya Science Center in Israel, each carrying an FM transponder. The satellites were built by 8 schools in different parts of Israel and launched in January 2022 on the SpaceX Falcon 9 Transporter 3 mission. A number of other satellites with amateur radio payloads are also re-entering shortly. A list of satellites approaching re-entry can be found on the web. Next up is AMSAT Oscar 7 will soon celebrate its 50th birthday on November 15, 2024, and is now in a period of continuous sunlight through May 22, 2027. While in continuous sunlight, the satellite's internal timer is expected to switch between the 2 transponders. They are Mode A, which is a 29 MHz downlink and 145 MHz uplink, and Mode B, which is 145 MHz downlink and 29 MHz uplink every 24 hours. Post reports and check current status on the AMSAT Live Oscar Satellite Status page. After a few days in continuous sunlight, it should be possible to determine the actual or approximate time the satellite switches. Next, there has been an explosion in space recently. The Russian Rescuers P-1, an almost 6-ton defunct Earth observation satellite that stopped orbit maintenance in 2017 but continued operations until 2022, unexpectedly exploded last week into hundreds of fragments. Expected to re-enter later this year, Rescuers P-1 was orbiting at 350 kilometers, close enough to the ISS's orbital altitude that the event forced ISS astronauts into shelter for an hour while the debris was tracked. And finally this week, NASA's Parker Solar Probe is set to make its closest approach to the Sun in an effort to bolster research into the effects of space weather on Earth. It became the first spacecraft to touch the Sun when it flew 10.46 million kilometers from its surface in 2021, and since then it has made 20 approaches, getting closer each time. The pioneering probe is on course to reach within 6.12 million kilometers of the vast star, the largest in our solar system, by the end of this year. It was launched in 2018 to uncover the Sun's secrets by studying its outer atmosphere, helping scientists to learn more about solar wind and how it travels through space. As a side note, many of the amateurs you hear on our newscast have their call signs aboard the Parker Solar Probe on a chip.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Although new ham license conditions have been in effect in Great Britain since February, some of the regulators' changes are still baffling to many amateurs. 5 months ago, Ofcom put new license conditions in place for radio amateurs in the UK, affecting a range of factors including call signs and power limits. Hams who are still uncertain about the impact of these changes can get a fuller explanation by watching a new video summary released by the Radio Society of Great Britain. Available on both the website and the YouTube channel of the Radio Society of Great Britain, the video looks at changes for Foundation licensees, including the ability to operate their station remotely via the Internet and the privilege granted to unlicensed persons to operate under supervision of a license holder. The 3-minute video also explores the next changes Ofcom has planned.
If the radio industry is to convince automakers to keep AM radio in the dashboard, the global car market may require an international effort. While broadcasters in the United States continue to push for legislation that will require all dashboards to feature AM and FM radio, similar efforts are underway in Europe. The European Broadcasting Union is reportedly seeking meetings with the big car makers there, including BMW, Volvo, and Mercedes. The EBU is looking to lobby for all cars to continue featuring broadcast radios as part of their entertainment systems. Radio is thriving in Europe. In Europe, listeners choose radio about 70% of the time, more than all other radio sources combined. People love it. Just press a button, and it's there, boasts an EBU-produced video promoting broadcasting. Similar to the arguments made by broadcasters in the U.S., the radio industry in Europe touts the role radio plays in providing live programming during the times of crisis, as well as the high level of trust that broadcasters have. The EBU says many car makers are already making it hard to access the radio by burying the radio button in a complex journey of swipes and taps. Customers need car makers to make it easy for them, the video says.
Coming up next, This Week in Amateur Radio is presenting another chapter of A Century of Amateur Radio, hams, organizations, events, inventions, from the mind of Chris Cordella, W2PA, and his editing team. Each episode will bring a different aspect of early amateur radio history. Coming up here on This Week in Amateur Radio.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. Oftentimes people will ask me if there is a written copy of the information that I present. There are so many call signs, dates, and URLs being discussed, you could never remember them until such time as you need to write them down. I use most of the same information that you hear in the DX Corner for the weekly DX column in the Ohio Section Journal. If you just Google ARRL Ohio Section, you will find the Ohio Section website, and from there you can subscribe to the weekly journal and get most of this information. The actual website is arrl-ohio.org. This is a free journal, and you don't need to be an ARRL member to receive it. You won't get the well-rounded information that you get from This Week in Amateur Radio podcast, but you will get my DX information. So here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, the only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. So here's a headline from America's Samoa. K8R refined Superfox prepares to shut down. After much experimentation last week, including a brief revision of one of the 2 Superfox stations to normal Fox-Hound mode, the K8R, quote, test operation team on American Samoa put both of its radios back into the Superfox mode. Quote, the Fox-Hound rates did not justify the switch, they said. As of last week, they had made over 16,000 Superfox contacts. K8R is wrapping up now so they can prepare for their departure to Jarvis Island on August the 1st. AA7JV George wants to reassure people that N5J on Jarvis Island will be on CW and FT8 Superfox most nights. We will not neglect CW, he says. The DX Adventure team headed to VU4 South Andaman, taking place between March 10th to the 21st of next year, have announced their team members. Their website says 13 ops in Dutch and 15 ops in English. They list 12 with bios that are listed there. They will be operating as Victor Uniform 4 X-Ray, and you can check that out by going to dx-adventure.com. The Bouvet Island DXpedition team, 3 Yankee 0 Kilo, reports that they are still negotiating contracts for this large-scale operation. They have 20 to 24 operators committed, and they need 4 to 6 more CW sideband operators. At this time, they are working on logistics, including helicopter access between November 2025 and March of 2026. They have the necessary permits to set up camp on either the southeast or southwest side of the island. A historical note, the first Norwegia expedition landed on Bouvet in 1927 and claimed it for Norway. They also landed on La Soya, a small rocky island at the southwestern part of Bouvet. If all goes well, 3 Yankee 0 Kilo will replicate this feat 99 years later. JASIC SP5EAQ confirms that the call sign for his October 22nd to the November 9th expedition to Nui Island will be E6AQ. This will also include a single operator effort in the CQ Worldwide DX Contest single sideband. ZL3GAV Gavin confirms his 2025 E6 Sierra Papa operation planned for 3 weeks in April. He said his, quote, more advanced mini DXpedition, end quote, with extra antennas and radios, including 6 meters and satellites. For satellite, he will concentrate on IO117, Green Cube, and others using linear FM. Father and son team SP9DLM Darek and SN9GM Gregor plan to be QRV first from Kazakhstan as UN/home call July 25th through August 12th, then in Kyrgyzstan as EX/home call August 13th to the 20th. A special event station, V84 SPU from Brunei, will be on the air through August 3rd, celebrating the 78th anniversary of the Sultan of Brunei. Hassanal Bolkiah Ibn Omar Ali Saifuddin III. V84 SPU will operate CW, sideband, and FT8 on all bands. Our team, Tango 2 Charlie in 2023 and P29RO in 2022 and other activities in the years before COVID, has decided to announce its next DXpedition. We will return to the Pacific and travel to Nauru, Charlie 2, in October 2024. We are planning to operate with 5 stations 24/7 from 160 through 6 meters in CW, sideband, FT8, and RTTY. Our group has extensive experience with traveling to Pacific Islands, but Nauru gave us some challenges. Getting all the necessary permissions and finding a usable location for the antennas is no easy task, especially for larger groups. We are grateful to Phil, Charlie 21 Tango Sierra, for his support on the island. Flights, accommodation, and a Radio Shack room are booked and confirmed. These are prerequisites for the necessary visa to enter Nauru. We also have acquired the necessary radio license. The call sign will be announced soon. Going to Nauru isn't cheap. Each of our team members spent several thousand euros. Due to the complicated logistics, we plan to arrive with 2 teams. 6 team members will arrive on October 11, 2024 and bring 2 stations. This includes the LZ wire beam and the LBS pentaplexer. This means that operation in the first days will occur only on the high bands. The rest of the team will arrive on October 14th for another 12 days. More details will be available soon, including a website or by listening to this podcast. And that was from Rolf, DL7VEE. Yesterday, the Radio Club de Province F6KOP announced plans for a second attempt to activate Guinea 3 X-ray. Their first attempt was after their 2020 de-expedition to Palestine, when they announced a 2021 effort, which eventually was canceled when the border was closed due to COVID. The experienced de-expedition team have announced their plans to go to Casa Island from November 27th to December 9th, 2024. They anticipate having at least a dozen operators and plan to be on 160 through 6 meters, including satellite. The last major de-expedition to Guinea was in 2016, and a single op effort occurred between 2021 and 2024. Currently, 3 X-ray ranks number 98 on Clublog's DXCC Most Wanted list. More details will follow. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B saying 7-3, and I hope to see you in the pileups.
Are you a new listener? Check out our webpage at twiar.net. You are with This Week in Amateur Radio.
Welcome to the 13th segment of Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. I want to thank Chris Cadella, W2PA, for permitting us to use his website in the preparation of these programs. So, presented here is the next of many chapters of Ham Radio History. Trunk lines. Clearly, Maxim's main goal was to establish reliable relaying across the entire country. He was excited by its collaborative nature. In the third and last free issue of QST, he wrote, "The cooperation of a few unknown but nevertheless kindred spirits between Portland, Maine, and Portland, Oregon, by means of which the message is handed on, adds a touch to the whole scheme and makes it almost utopian." It was the primary reason for organizing the League, whose membership had just reached 1,000 in late 1915. But a great idea alone did not lead to a practical system. The first of the blueprint items, and the only one pertaining to operating procedure, advised stations across the country to routinely announce themselves QRU, i.e. ready to receive messages, and maintain a regular schedule. Maxim then added the concept of running regular tests. Aside from exercising the system and its parts, he hoped the tests would serve to bring timid operators out of their shells and get them to announce themselves. He believed there was a pervasive case of key fright among the members, similar to what we more recently recognize as a novice's first contact fear. But Maxim observed this condition even among some experienced operators. He considered it a serious obstacle to establishing a reliable system, writing, "There are a great many amateurs who lack the nerve or whatever else it is to break in and send out a general QRU. There is something akin to standing up before the crowd and making a speech in sending a general call. Some people would rather take a thrashing rather than touch their key for the purpose. They feel that they cannot send well enough, or that they will become rattled, or that something will happen in the form of a comeback, which will disclose the awful fact that they cannot receive well. These people never entirely get over this feeling, and many of them have station equipment which, in the hands of an operator with more nerve, could do wonders. For this reason, any plan which calls for initiative on the part of all stations in a voluntary organization, such as the Relay League, is bound to be only partially effective. He further proposed establishing a network of trunk lines across the country, linking major cities, which would serve to channel messages across the country over paths known to be reliable. In the eastern part of the country, a trunk line ran south along the New England coast, Trunk Line C, branching first at Boston out to Chicago, A, and again at Philadelphia out to New Orleans, D, before continuing to the Carolinas and Florida. In the western states, 3 lines beginning in Chicago, A, St. Louis, B, and Houston, E, extended west out to Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Then were linked together along the West Coast trunk line, F. Stations lying along these lines would collaborate in organizing themselves locally with the best stations. Maxim dubbed them star stations, emerging over time through constant testing and reporting of results to ARRL headquarters via mail. District headquarters would be established for each trunk line and would each be responsible for developing their own piece of the system. The League would thus be a national federation of local organizations, the beginnings of the nested hierarchical structure that eventually became the national traffic system. Although the trunk lines were only a suggestion, amateurs apparently latched onto the specific design Maxim had published, judging from the letters he received. Eager to establish the local headquarters for the lines and pass along responsibility for getting them organized, he suggested 3 to start with, in Chicago, San Francisco, and in the east either in Philadelphia or somewhere in New Jersey. These were chosen because they were population centers that lay either at junctions or along more than one trunk line. One prerequisite was that each HQ should be chosen for their operators' organizational skills. Another was that they would always meet their test message schedules or get a substitute. Stations that failed to be on the air at the right time were the biggest impediment to amateur radio relaying. Therefore, the line should operate only one night per week rather than attempt it more often at the cost of decreased reliability. The exact time of operation was left up to the discretion of each trunk line, but Maxim suggested that it should be late enough to both eliminate QRM from the little boys and to be after the time when most movies ended at theaters. But he also advocated operating at the same time all across the country in order to try to set new records, for example, to possibly complete a round-trip Chicago to Maine relay and acknowledgement in 15 to 20 minutes. Message and acknowledgement formats should contain the calls of all the relayers so as to be able to constantly evaluate the system and detect dead ends. Finally, he asked again for the help from the local amateur radio communities in figuring out who should be district HQs. ARRL HQ did not know enough about the individual stations to make that determination. One woman who stood out among the stations of the nascent relay network, Mrs. Emma Candler, 8NH, later 8ER of Marysville, Ohio, shared a station with her husband Charles, but was by far the more active of the two. Trained and employed as a telegraph operator at the Marconi Company, she quickly became a proficient wireless operator when she got on air in 1915. Early in her amateur career, tired of being referred to on the air as OM, she one day told another amateur that she was in fact an OW, and from then on was known as such to her friends. She became ARRL Central Division Superintendent until after the war, when a career teaching math kept her from resuming her league role. Included in this material are quotes from the following: Hiram Percy Maxim, Practical Relaying, QST, February 1916, page 19. Hiram Percy Maxim, Practical Relaying, QSD, March 1916, page 45. Emma Candler, 8NH, Who's Who in Amateur Wireless, QSD, October 1916, page 303. With a thank you tip of the This Week in Amateur Radio hat to W2PA, Chris Codella, for the use of his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
SpaceX suffered a setback in its Starlink satellite constellation project this week after a malfunction during launch resulted in the loss of 20 satellites. While the Musk-owned company tried to salvage the situation, bad space weather doomed the mission. The incident occurred on Thursday night when the second stage engine of a Falcon 9 rocket failed to complete its planned burn. This left the deployed Starlink satellites in a much lower orbit than intended, where they encountered significant atmospheric drag. At this level of drag, our maximum available thrust is unlikely to be enough to successfully raise the satellites, SpaceX said. The company attempted to use the satellites' onboard ion thrusters to raise their orbits. However, the situation was further complicated by an unusually puffed-up atmosphere due to recent high solar activity. This atmospheric drag sealed the fate of the satellites, even with the attempted thruster boost. This incident marks a rare anomaly for the typically reliable Falcon 9, a workhorse for SpaceX missions. CEO Elon Musk acknowledged the situation on social media, referencing Star Trek in a lighthearted attempt to explain the extreme measures taken. We had them attempt to run the ion thrusters at warp 9 speed. But unlike a Star Trek episode, this will probably not work.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The story goes that the name of our hobby, at least in some parts of the world, ham radio, stems from the notion that we as a community were perceived as being ham-fisted in our ability to operate a Morse key. We apparently claimed that slur and made it our own. I've never actually been able to verify this narrative, but it goes to the heart of what it is to be part of the hobby of amateur radio, as opposed to professional radio, which is what I once heard someone refer to themselves as. This notion that we are playing outside our sandbox, that we're doing something less than real, that we're somehow not whole as a result, is absurd, especially in the context of how we are an integral part of how spectrum is allocated around the globe. It's fun to remember that playing outside the box, trialing things, exploring, inventing, and learning is the reason we're here. The whole thing is incremental, much like learning to walk. Sometimes you fall flat on your face, yet here you are perambulating like a champ. As an aside, did you know that how you get up off the floor is pretty much how you learn to do it as a toddler? It might not be the most efficient, but it's how you do it. Speaking of falling down, making mistakes on air is part and parcel of being an amateur. There's no protocol police, nobody to issue a fine if you make a mistake. Just dust yourself off and try again. The urge to optimize pervades our hobby. We optimize our antennas, our gear, the time and band we choose to communicate on, the modes we use, the places we operate from, even how we participate in contests. All of it is a cycle of optimization. During contests, I've regularly attempted to flex my imagination to optimize my activities. For example, the VK Shires contest rewards you for combinations of shires. So, I created a map of all the shires, then looked for places to activate, preferably on or near borders, so I could change shire with minimal effort. There are contests that reward different Maidenhead locators, so I set about finding spots where you could activate 4 at once. By the way, a Maidenhead locator is an amateur radio geolocator, which I'll dig into some other time. Contesters regularly use multiple radios to optimize their ability to talk to stations that double their points, so-called multipliers. Over the years, I've come across many different excuses for getting on air and making noise. Popular activities like Parks on the Air or POTA, Summits on the Air or SOTA, and plenty of others are all programs that aim to get you out of your shack, set up your station at a particular location, and make contact with anyone and everyone. On occasion, you'll hear a station combining activities, doing both a POTA and a SOTA activation because the summit is inside the boundaries of a national park. Ian, Mike Zero Tango Romeo Tango, took this idea to a whole new level. He wondered if you could qualify for multiple programs simultaneously, and, if so, how many. Gathering data from summits, parks, islands, beaches and bunkers on the air, together with UK Castle and Lighthouse Awards, and adding Worldwide Flora and Fauna or WWFF, 8 programs in all, he set about exploring. For some programs like castles, lighthouses and bunkers, you need to be within 1 kilometre of the entity, and summits need to be activated within 25 metres altitude from the peak. For other programs, beaches, parks and islands, plenty of extra work was needed. Ian's code is available on GitHub in the WEAOA or Worked Everything Everywhere All at Once award repository. If you have time to head out to the beach just east of Devil's Point near Plymouth, you'll be able to activate 21 different programs at the same time. The Maidenhead locator is India Oscar 70 Whiskey India 06. As with any outdoor amateur radio activity, take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints, and kill nothing but time. Be mindful of creating obstacles and trip hazards for your fellow humans, and be prepared to have a park ranger turn up as soon as you sit down. Oh, and if you think that's not in the spirit of amateur radio, you haven't been paying attention. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
The following story comes from the Radio Amateurs of Canada. The Secretary of the Radio Amateurs of Canada hereby solicits nominations for the positions of Director for the regions of Atlantic, British Columbia, Yukon, Midwestern Ontario North and East, postal codes K and P. If required, an election for this position will be held in October 2024. The Director will take office on January 1, 2025 for a 2-year term. The incumbents are Atlantic, Al Penny, VO1NO. British Columbia and Yukon, Keith Whitney, VE7KW. Midwest, Ed Richardson, VE4EAR, VE4VT. And Ontario North and East, Craig Delmage, VE3OP. The candidate must be a full voting member of RAC, must have reached the legal age of majority, and must reside in the region for which he or she is nominated. A candidate may not nominate himself or herself. The nomination form will be printed or typed, clearly indicate the candidate's name, call sign and RAC membership number, and clearly indicate the names, call signs, RAC membership numbers, and original signatures of 10 or more full voting members of the RAC. The nominators must have reached the legal age of majority and must reside in the same region as the candidate whom they are nominating. Also, each candidate must sign the nomination form indicating a willingness to be nominated. Also must include with the nomination a brief biographical sketch limited to 500 words, succinctly setting out his or her background and qualifications. Further, a candidate choosing to submit a biographical sketch in both English and French languages will be allowed 500 words in each language. The biographical sketch will not include any campaign platform material. All original nominations and supporting documentation, including the biographical sketch, must be received by the Secretary of the RAC by 12 noon on Friday, September 4, 2024. It is suggested but not required that the nomination forms be sent by registered mail. Faxed or email documents will not be accepted. clearly indicate on the mailing envelope that the nomination documents are enclosed. The envelope will be held unopened until after the closing deadline of September 16, 2024. After this date, the Election Committee, under the supervision of the RAC Secretary, will open all submissions, review the documentation for accuracy, completeness, and validity, and then announce the results of the call for nominations. The decision of the Election Committee is final. Should a balloted election be required, ballots will be mailed from RAC headquarters on or before September 18, 2024. Nominations must be sent to the following address: Secretary, Radio Amateurs of Canada, 720 Belfast Road, Suite 217, Ottawa, Ontario, K1G 0Z5. Clearly indicate on the envelope nomination documents.
According to the DARC, congratulations are in order for Christian Leuven of Dulsberg, Germany. Christian successfully passed his licensing exam on June 24th and has become the country's first entry-level Class N amateur radio operator. Class N amateurs have access to 70 centimeters, 2 meters, and 10 meters. They may operate at a maximum of 10 watts.
Looking for older editions of our news service? You can find them all as part of the digital library of amateur radio and communications through the facilities of the Internet Archive. You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. If you are a fan of AO7, it is now in continuous sunlight through May 22nd of 2027. Yes, that is 3 years of sunlight. Every 24 hours, the satellite will switch from Mode A, which is 29 megahertz down and 145 megahertz up, and Mode B, which is 145 megahertz down and 432 megahertz up. What this means is that if you are used to operating when in Mode B and you do not hear the satellite, try Mode A, or wait until the satellite decides to switch modes. November 15th of this year will mark the 50th anniversary of AO7. That is a pretty remarkable job the hams did to have a satellite last this long, and they did not use radiation-hardened parts back then. XW2B has returned to service. The satellite uses an inverting linear transponder with an uplink between 436.090 and 435.110 megahertz, and a downlink between 145.730 and 145.750 megahertz. This makes another linear satellite available for use. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time to take a look at space weather with the weekly propagation forecast report, brought to us each week by Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington. Solar activity was a bit lower this week. 7 new sunspot groups appeared. The only day with no new sunspot groups was Sunday, July 21st. The next day, 2 new sunspot groups arose, and all other days each had 1 new group of sunspots. The average daily sunspot number was 208.1, down from 215.9, while average daily solar flux declined from 226 to 193. Geomagnetic numbers remained quiet, with average planetary A index unchanged at 6, and middle latitude numbers changing from 8 to 7.3. The outlook for the next few weeks has solar flux reaching a short-term maximum of 230 on August 12th through the 14th. Future geomagnetic indicators look very quiet for many weeks. The outlook for the next few weeks has solar flux reaching a short-term maximum of 230 on August 12th to the 14th. Spaceweather.com sent out this alert on July 25th. Major farside solar flare. Europe's solar orbiter spacecraft just detected the most intense solar flare of the current solar cycle. The X-14 category explosion sprayed energetic particles throughout the solar system, causing high dose rates on Mars and even hitting Earth on the opposite side of the Sun. The source of the flare could turn to face our planet late next week. Looking ahead at the predicted solar flux for the near term, it will be 170 on July 28th and 29th. 175 on July 30th and 31st, 165 on August 1st and 2nd, then 170, 180 and 190 on August 3rd through the 5th, and hold steady at 200 on August 6th through the 11th. Taking a quick look at the predicted planetary A index for the near term, it will be 18 and 8 on July 27th and 28th, and then hold steady at 5 on July 29th all the way through August 14th.
In radio sport this week, 4 contests, all on July 27th and 28th. First, it's the MARAC U.S. Countries QSO Party. That's CW and phone. Then the ARAM 50 MHz contest, CW and phone. July 27th and 28th, the RSGP IOTA contest, CW and phone. And on the 27th and 28th of July as well, the Alabama QSO Party. That is CW and phone. On July 28th, the ARS Flight of the Bumblebees, CW. And on July 30th, it's the Worldwide Sideband Activity Contest, that is phone. And you can always visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section and state division conventions on July 27th, the ARRL West Virginia State Convention, that's in Sutton, West Virginia. On August 3rd, the Kootenai Amateur Radio Society sponsoring the ARRL Idaho State Convention in Post Falls, Idaho. August 3rd, the Elkhart East Ham Fest, sponsoring the ARRL Central Division Convention. That's in Elkhart, Indiana. And on August 4th, the SVARC Berryville Ham Fest, sponsoring the ARRL Virginia State Convention. That's in Berryville, Virginia.
13 New York area property owners have been put on notice by the FCC, which is charging them with permitting individuals to engage in illegal radio broadcasts. The properties were identified by the FCC as being in Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Spring Valley, which is north of New York City. The FCC also sent notices to landowners in Newark and Irvington, New Jersey, to the city's immediate west. The enforcement action taken on July 11th was done under the Pirate Act, which strengthens the agency's powers of sanction and sets higher penalties for violations. An FCC press release said that if the property owners continue to permit illegal radio activity, they could face fines as up to $2.4 million. The PIRATE acronym stands for Preventing Illegal Radio Abuse Through Enforcement Act, which took effect April of 2021.
On Saturday, June 8th and Saturday, June 15th, 2024, the Oregon Disaster Airlift Response Team conducted its 3rd annual whale run, a full-scale exercise involving general aviation aircraft supported by amateur radio communications. While the pilots were conducting reconnaissance flights of infrastructure and delivering nutritional and medical supplies to remote coastal communities, including 2 Native American tribes, hams were sending landing area weather reports and tracking takeoffs and landings via WinLink on HF. The exercise scenario was a simulated abrupt shift of the Earth's crust along the Cascadia subduction zone in the Pacific Ocean, resulting in a full-length megathrust rupture of that fault. The aftermath of such an event involves a large earthquake with aftershocks, coastal subsidence, tsunami waves, liquefaction of tidal flats, river estuaries, and areas with artificial fills, landslides along steeper slopes, and reactivation of some older deep-seated landslides, widespread containment failure of above-ground and below-ground fuel and chemical storage tanks, ground and surface water contamination, and toxic chemical spills and fires, widespread failure of the electrical grid, water distribution infrastructure, roadways, and bridges, and damage to fiber optic and copper lines, cellular and landline phone systems, commercial radio, internet services, and amateur radio repeaters. For areas between Cape Mendocino in Northern California and Nootka Island in British Columbia, it is not a matter of if this will happen in the future, but when it will take place. ODART conducted 11 cargo positioning flights carrying 3,050 pounds of food on June 8th and 11th, and cargo delivery flights on June 15th. The amount of cargo delivered on the second Saturday to simulated impact areas was less, as one of the destination airfields on the northern Oregon coast couldn't be reached safely because of weather. Hopefully that set of deliveries can be completed before the end of the summer. In 2023, one float plane made a single delivery flight, But in 2024, this increased to 5 float planes, making a total of 6 delivery flights. New for the 2024 exercise from an amateur radio perspective was the use of custom WinLink forms using insertion tags, which made the information transfer more efficient and resulted in consistent formatting. An aeronautical mobile station was aloft on both exercise weekends to see how air-to-ground communications via ham radio might be effective in relaying tactical messages in an actual emergency. Despite using headphones, a high noise level in the cockpit is something which still requires a better solution. The 2024 edition of the Whale Run full-scale exercise involved 20 general aviation pilots flying over 7,500 air miles. They were supported by over 40 radio amateurs from 10 different counties across a 360-mile-long geographic footprint. This exercise was a bit more challenging as a coronal mass ejection from sunspot AR3712 occurred just a few hours before the start of the exercise on the second day. But the communications teams overcame the challenge. All food banks were most grateful for the donations they received. Volunteer general aviation groups with missions similar to ODART exist in most areas of the country. So if your MCOM group isn't currently helping one with their communications, now would be the good time to reach out.
Celebrating 25 years of providing the amateur radio community with the latest ham radio news and information, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
The Vice Director of the ARRL Southeastern Division, Jeffrey J. Beals, WA4AW, has become a silent key. He died on July 20th of 2024. Beals was born in 1951, devoted a lifetime of service to amateur radio, having served in many local clubs, the ARRL field organization, and on the ARRL Board of Directors. He was also elected Vice President of the Quarter Century Wireless Association in 2023. Beals was first licensed at the age of 12 in the early 1960s in his native Long Beach, New York. He was active with the local Five Towns Radio Club and Nassau County Amateur Radio Emergency Service and RACES. He also had a 2-meter radio on his bicycle. He held amateur extra classes and first-class radio telephone licenses from the FCC. His service with amateur radio emergency communications included serving as Section Emergency Coordinator for the ARRL Southern Florida Section, Assistant SEC, District Emergency Coordinator for the Gold Coast District, Emergency Coordinator and County RACES Officer for Lee and Palm Beach counties. He was also a member of the ARRL National Emergency Response Planning Committee. He was certified at all levels of the ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Communications courses, Public Relations Training, and advanced FEMA training. Beals received the State of Florida commendations for service with Hurricanes Andrew and Katrina. He also was deployed to Hurricanes Francis, Jean, Wilma, Matthew, and Irma. ARRL Southeastern Division Director Mickey Baker, N4MB, recalls that Beals' passion for service involved getting others active in the service as well. Jeff was a connector. His superpower was finding volunteers and organizing events so that others would see the value of their service. We'll see you next time, and we know you would call. He volunteered many of us to charitable runs and bike rides, the South Florida Fair, and other events that promoted amateur radio and hamfests. He volunteered and hired clubs and then challenged us to show, wrote Baker of his longtime friend. Beals was also active in service with the Quarter Century Wireless Club, with which he mostly served as National Vice President. He was Secretary and Treasurer of the Palm Beach Chapter 111 since 1999, and a member of the National Board of Directors and historian. He was also a member of the Highlands, Edison, Everglades, and Citrus chapters of QCWA. Section Manager of ARRL Southern Florida Section, Barry Porter, KB1PA, worked closely with Beals. Jeff knew the lay of the land and how to get things done, he said. He showed me the ropes, and I could be an effective section manager. Beals held membership in the ARRL A1 Operators Club, the Old Timers Club, and the Royal Order of the Wolf Hong. He also was named Ham of the Year by the West Palm Beach ARC. He was an ARRL certified examiner and volunteer examiner with ARRL, and a volunteer examiner with W5YI and Laurel VECs. Baker said the boardroom will not be the same. I will miss Jeff at the ARRL board meetings. He would lean over and give me insight into the ongoing live issues, he said. As always, we discuss difficult issues. Jeff has longtime friends, some from high school, on the ARRL board, said Baker. Beals is survived by his wife, Myra Kitchen, KB3PGH. Donations in the memory of Jeff Beals can be made to the ARRL Diamond Club, a fund which supports ARRL's National Association for Amateur Radio.
On the QRZ.com page for his upcoming special event, Rick Marzo, KB1FGC, publicly thanks the hams who have helped him. Steve, N1AOB, Glenn, WG3F, Bill, W1FMX, and Joe, AA2IL. Those are just the main names on Rich's list, and the thanks don't end there. For the third consecutive year, Rich has organized a 3-day event in which he and other hams can publicly thank their Elmers by operating one of 3 call signs, W1E, W3E, and W4E. This year's event is happening on October 18th through the 20th. According to a press release from Rich, there are a dozen operators already signed up, but any ham who wants to express their gratitude and acknowledge those amateurs who have provided technical and moral support are welcome to sign on as an Elmer Special Event Operator. Rich says that if he gets enough response from another call district not represented by the existing 3 call signs, he will apply for a 4th. Contact him via the email address found on the QRZ.com page for KB1FGC.
Carnegie Mellon University in Pennsylvania recently added amateur radio to its curriculum for engineering students. Now, in India, another college has made that move. Honors students in chemistry are being given the opportunity to add amateur radio to their first semester course load at a college in West Bengal, India. The RK Mission Vivekananda Centenary College announced recently that school officials believe becoming a licensed ham will provide a gateway into the police force, the paramilitary, airport traffic work, and various divisions of the Indian military. The class is being designed to prepare students for the Amateur Station Operator Certificate issued by the Ministry of Communications. The announcement by the private engineering school was reported on the website of thestatesman.com. The school's principal said that although only chemistry students will be eligible for enrollment at this time, educators may expand the roster to include undergraduates focusing on physics. The school also plans to set up an amateur radio station on the campus. 70 students have enrolled in the course, which is being taught by the Indian Academy of Communications.
NASA has begun trying to better understand radio waves detected coming from coronal mass ejections, and now they have the tool to help them. The unprecedented use of a research tool in space known as low-frequency radio interferometry is helping NASA scientists track radio waves emanating from coronal mass ejections. The mission is known as CURIE, an acronym for CubeSat Radio Interferometry Experiment. Designed by scientists from the University of California, Berkeley, CURIE's 2 small spacecraft launched from French Guiana aboard a European Space Agency Ariane 6 rocket making its inaugural flight. This is the first space mission looking specifically at the origin of these radio signals, which are commonly detected during solar flares, CMEs, and solar storms. CURIE's 2 CubeSats are designed to capture the radio waves and triangulate them to determine their point of origin. Scientists are hoping that their findings can help better predict disruptions in communications as a result of rough solar weather.
According to QRZ.com, the International Amateur Traffic Net, one of the oldest continuing nets in the United States, needs your help. In a posting in one of QRZ.com's forums, Holger, K2HES, said that the 20-meter net, also known as Intercon, needs additional net control stations to cover a 1-hour shift handling emergency communications. The net receives priority and emergency traffic on 14.300 megahertz daily from 1200 UTC to 1700 UTC during standard time and from 1100 UTC to 1600 UTC during daylight savings time in the U.S. Hams with at least a general class U.S. license are eligible to fill one of the available slots as net control. Visit intercontinentalnet.org. That's intercontinentalnet, all one word, .org, for more details and to see the net control schedule with the shifts that are available. The net has been on the air providing communication and goodwill since 1960.
The UK regulator Ofcom is looking for a means of allowing sky-based systems to enhance connectivity for smartphones and similar mobile devices. The UK regulator seeks views on ways to implement direct-to-device services for mobile coverage during the outages of traditional networks and as a way to provide service to underserved areas. This could mean technology deployed from satellites, aircraft, or additional airborne platforms. Acknowledging that such technology will have an impact on the limited availability of radio spectrum, the regulator is asking for input from the public and will receive comments until September 13. A call for input form is available as a download from the Ofcom website.
Serving the amateur radio community for a quarter century, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, heard around the world on the amateur bands and streaming on the Internet. Wireless tech company Morse Micro has achieved a new Wi-Fi distance record of 1.8 miles, that's 3 kilometers, using the HALO 802.111AH standard. While HALO was originally announced in 2016, its proper implementation is only just starting to pick up steam, and now Morse Micro is pulling it off in a big way. Morse Micro's connection speed during this testing ranged from 11 megabits per second at 500 meters to just 1 megabit per second at the maximum range of 3 kilometers, but this was still enough to maintain a working video call. The company uploaded the demonstration to YouTube if you want to see the testing in action. Part of what makes this test impressive isn't just the sheer range at which a working Wi-Fi signal could be accomplished. It was its ability to work at that range despite all the real-world wireless interference of the surrounding urban area. Since ultra-long-range Wi-Fi devices like this are primarily targeted at Internet of Things scenarios rather than media due to the lower speeds, this feat suggests that Wi-Fi HALO is the ultimate long-range wireless solution. Besides having long range and great resistance to interference, Wi-Fi HALO also offers lower power consumption than exceedingly high-speed mainstream Wi-Fi solutions like Wi-Fi 7. Morse Micro tested with its MM6108 Wi-Fi HALO production silicone, which is Wi-Fi Alliance and FCC certified. The chances are that HALO and its speed compromises aren't in your best interests for your daily driver needs at home. But for back-end devices in enterprise scenarios, or if you're mega-rich and own a mansion, Wi-Fi capable of pushing nearly 2 miles of range is quite impressive. People often walk that distance or more just to access public Wi-Fi. Maybe one day we'll even see HALO implementations for public Wi-Fi offerings at those longer ranges.
The UK regulator Ofcom is looking for a means of allowing sky-based systems to enhance connectivity for smartphones and similar mobile devices. The UK regulator seeks views on ways to implement direct-to-device services for mobile coverage during the outages of traditional networks and as a way to provide service to underserved areas. This could mean technology deployed from satellites, aircraft, or additional airborne platforms. Acknowledging that such technology will have an impact on the limited availability of radio spectrum, the regulator is asking for input from the public and will receive comments until September 13. A call for input form is available as a download from the Ofcom website.
In the world of DX this week, Perrine Island, a stingray-shaped island in Indonesia, is set for a DXpedition in August, celebrating the 79th anniversary of the Republic's independence. Some members of ARRL, the National Society for Amateur Radio, plan a full 4-day weekend event beginning on August 16th with a flag ceremony on the 17th. Operators will be calling CQ with the call sign 7E79RI on 6 HF bands and 1 VHF band. The hams are members of Harari's local East Jakarta group, YH0AD. Announcing the trip in one of the forums in QRZ.com, Fayez Sawanto, YC0SJA, said that the DXpedition could be combined with a family trip since the island is also a popular spot for tourists. Perry Island is part of the Seribu Island Group, IOTA number OC-177. Indonesian nationalists declared the republic to be free of rule by the Dutch on the 17th of August, 1945. According to the United States Indonesia Society, it is the world's third largest democracy.
UK regulator Ofcom has announced it plans to permit smaller separation distances and greater maximum power for users of the part of the spectrum between 3.8 and 4.2 gigahertz. Ofcom proposes allowing an increase by 3 dB for the maximum power limit of so-called low-power devices. Ofcom called these changes improvements that are part of its shared access framework, which began in 2019 as a way of giving more users access through shared spectrum. Ofcom also plans to allow unlicensed, low-power devices to be used indoors on the frequencies between 2320 and 2340 MHz within the amateur radio 13-centimeter shared band. Many of these and related changes are expected to take effect in the final quarter of the year. In the meantime, Ofcom is seeking input on these proposals no later than September 18, 2024.
32 amateur radio operators from clubs across central New York turned out to help with communications for the Boilermaker Road Race in Utica, New York on Sunday, July 14, 2024. The event is known for bringing some of the best runners in the world to upstate New York. A total of 14,000 participants competed in 3 different categories: the 5K, the 15K, and the 15K wheelchair event. Don Peterson, KD2 ILO, president of the Fort Herkimer Amateur Radio Association, said his club brought its disaster action response trailer to help state, county, and local police agencies by being the extra eyes and ears that help keep the race running smoothly. The trailer also helped increase awareness of amateur radio and its importance to local events and emergency situations around the world.
The images of 2 oddly shaped ionospheric plasma bubbles have been captured by a NASA spectrograph project, and scientists are saying that they may be tied to disruptions in radio communications. They are hoping for a better understanding of these electrically charged shapes and why they occur, in their search for clues into how to make radio communications more resilient during disturbances such as a major solar storm. The images of these rarely seen shapes were captured by a NASA mission known as Global Scale Observations of the Limb and Disk, known by the acronym GOLD. GOLD is a 2-channel spectrograph launched 6 years ago with the mission to capture images of ionospheric weather. NASA scientists believe that storm activity in the ionosphere created the oddly shaped plasma bubbles. GOLD has captured them previously, but only during extreme space or terrestrial disturbances. They are shaped like the letter C or its reverse, and sometimes the letter X. They typically form near the magnetic equator of our planet. Normally, plasma bubbles are long and straight, leading scientists to believe that these shapes are the result of forces such as terrestrial winds.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
And finally this week, imagine being stranded on the International Space Station. There is still no return date for Boeing's stranded Starliner astronauts, who have been stuck on the International Space Station since June after their spacecraft developed multiple issues, NASA has announced. Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams rode to orbit in Boeing's spacecraft following years of delays, successfully blasting off on Starliner's inaugural crewed flight from Florida's Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on June 5. they were scheduled to stay a week in orbit. But during the flight, the spacecraft suffered a series of issues, including 5 helium leaks and 5 failures of its reaction control system thrusters, forcing engineers to troubleshoot issues on the ground. This extended the 2 astronauts' stay aboard the International Space Station to the current 50-plus days. Yet NASA and Boeing say that even though ground tests have been completed, there is still no clear date for a flight home. When the astronauts will return remains unclear, but NASA officials have previously said that the spacecraft has enough fuel to remain in orbit until mid-August at the latest. Stick said that NASA and Boeing may perform a test fire of the spacecraft as early as next week. Following this review, Stick added, an undock time will be set. Starliner was built as a part of NASA's Commercial Crew Program, a partnership between the agency and private companies to take astronauts into low Earth orbit following the retirement of NASA's Space Shuttle program in 2011. SpaceX's Crew Dragon also came from this initiative and has tallied 13 crewed flights since it began operating in 2020. But Starliner's journey into orbit has been much more troubled. A software glitch on its first uncrewed test flight pushed Starliner onto the wrong orbit, and a second attempt was scrubbed due to a faulty fuel valve. Other issues, including problems with parachutes and the need to remove 1.6 kilometers of flammable tape, also subsequently cropped up. The current, third crewed flight attempt was briefly delayed by issues with a vibrating oxygen valve and a small but persistent helium leak. Engineers ultimately deemed the craft safe to fly despite those issues. After liftoff, the leaks multiplied and several thrusters conked out, delaying the craft's docking with the ISS's Harmony module and later postponing its return to Earth. NASA officials say the spacecraft is still safe, and that the return has been delayed this long so that scientists can collect as much data as possible on the malfunctioning RCS thrusters before they are jettisoned and burn up upon re-entry. The astronaut's stay has been largely safe but not entirely without incident. On June 27, a defunct Russian satellite broke apart in orbit, sending debris toward the ISS and forcing Williams and Wilmore, along with the other 7 astronauts on board, to take cover inside their respective space capsules. Obviously, the backup option is to use a different system. I would rather not go into all those details until we get to that time, if we ever get to that time, NASA said. We really have our team focused on, as we close in on this final flight rationale, returning Butch and Suni on Starliner.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on nets and great repeater systems like our newest affiliates, the K2IWR repeater on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, and the K2MST repeater on 443.150 MHz serving all of Syracuse, New York. We welcome them aboard the vast This Week in Amateur Radio network of repeaters and nets around the world. If your net or repeater carries This Week in Amateur Radio, why not let us know about it, and we'll give you a free promo here on the air. All you need to do is put all the details into an email and give us the repeater call sign, frequency, area served, and the days and times that you carry This Week in Amateur Radio, and send it off in an email to w2xbs77@gmail.com. We'd be happy to hear from you. That address once again is w2xbs77@gmail.com. We hope to hear from you real soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copies sent as an attachment to w2xbs77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter. AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.